Welcome to Cheating Tales Diary. Before we dive into today's story, we have a humble request. Please consider subscribing to this new channel. Help us hit our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Your support will motivate us to keep bringing you more exclusive original cheating wife stories. And now let's get started with today's story. Dylan Hayes cooked spaghetti that night. Extra garlic, just how Leah liked it. 7-year-old Maddie had already cleared her plate and was now sitting at the dining table, wrapping a new scarf around her plush unicorn. Dylan took the last sip of his wine and reached for Leah's hand like he always did. A small gesture, just to feel that everything was still okay. But Leah pulled away like his touch might burn her. The moment was small, but it hit like a punch to the chest. "You okay?" Dylan asked, his eyes carrying the same concern they did during his final year of deployment. Leah didn't look at him. "Just tired. Coaching sessions were intense today." Dylan tried to smile, but his jaw tensed. Something was off, and it wasn't just fatigue. 3 months ago, Leah had started seeing a transformational life coach named Brian Quinn. Dylan had supported it. He understood the value of therapy after his years in the Navy. But something shifted after Brian entered the picture. Leah stopped wearing makeup. Her phone was always on silent. She'd go on walks with her headphones in, talking to herself, and even when she came home, it was like she never really came back. Maddie spoke up. "Daddy, can we watch Brave again tonight?" "Sure, pumpkin," Dylan said, ruffling her dark hair. "But nothing scary, okay?" Leah stood abruptly. "I'm going to lie down. My head is eliminating me." "Eliminating?" Dylan repeated, confused. But she was already walking off. The bedroom door closed, not slammed, just firm. Final. That night, while Dylan watched the movie with Maddie, Leah never came out of the bedroom. Later, while cleaning up the kitchen, he saw it. Leah's phone, unlocked, sitting on the counter. Dylan wasn't the kind of man to invade someone's privacy. But he also wasn't the kind to pretend nothing was happening. He picked up the phone. The text thread was already open. Brian Quinn at the top. "Brian, you did so well today. You're almost free." Leah. "I felt powerful, for once, like I don't owe anyone an explanation." Brian. "Because you don't. Dylan is a chapter. Maddie will understand in time." Leah. "I'm scared. He's starting to notice." Brian. "Then let's move up the plan. You ready to file?" Something shattered inside Dylan. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a script. A plan. The next morning, Leah acted normal. She made French toast, kissed Maddie, spoke to Dylan like nothing had happened. But Dylan didn't smile back. He looked at her the way a soldier might look at an enemy across a battlefield. Her eyes were lined with mascara, but he saw only lies. Days passed. Leah's therapies turned into all-day disappearances. Dylan installed nanny cams, one in the smoke detector, another tucked into the bookshelf. Within 2 weeks, he had footage. Brian sitting in their living room, holding Leah's hands, whispering with the kind of closeness Dylan used to know. One evening, Dylan asked her, "You going to Brian again?" Leah said nothing. "Does Maddie know he's more than just your coach?" Leah suddenly threw her plate across the room, shattering ceramic, shattering silence. "You think I owe you a fucking explanation after everything?" "Everything what?" Dylan's voice was calm, but a storm swirled beneath. Leah didn't scream. She just said, "You don't get it. You're suffocating. You're not enough. And Brian, he sees me." That night, Dylan spent hours in his garage office. He opened his old Navy footlocker and pulled out his surveillance gear. He wasn't a husband anymore. He was a soldier. But this time, the enemy wasn't overseas. The enemy was in his home. Maddie's drawings started to change. One night, Dylan found a crayon sketch. 3 people, a mom, a coach, and a man locked in a giant cage. At the bottom, she had written, "Daddy can't come out." Dylan realized this wasn't about love anymore. It wasn't even about custody. This was character assassination, emotional hijacking. The next morning, Leah handed him a cold coffee, his favorite, but something tasted off, a strange metallic aftertaste. Dylan quietly poured it down the sink. Leah said, "You're not yourself lately." Dylan replied, "Neither are you." That was the last time Leah looked him in the eye. That night, Maddie whispered to him, "Why is Mommy always whispering to Brian on the phone?" Dylan pulled her close to his chest, and in that moment, he made a decision. He wouldn't stay silent. He'd go to court, show the evidence, and rescue his daughter from this emotional cult her mother had fallen into. But what he didn't know was that the next move wouldn't be Leah's. It would be the law's. That morning, police officers came to Dylan Hayes' front door and put him in handcuffs. Maddie was at the breakfast table trying to eat her toast. Leah stood in the hallway, no tears in her eyes, just a carefully rehearsed look of fear. Two officers, one male, one female, led Dylan out onto the porch. He managed to say just one thing. "Maddie, Daddy will be home soon, okay?" But even he didn't believe that promise. Inside the cruiser, the officer told him a formal domestic assault complaint had been filed. The accuser, Leah Hayes. The claim, multiple instances of verbal and physical abuse, including an alleged incident the previous night where she said Dylan shoved her into a cabinet. "A cabinet?" Dylan repeated. "She's making this up. There was no fight." The officer looked at him and simply said, "That's what court is for." The holding cell walls were stone cold, but not as cold as the betrayal. Dylan was strip-searched, fingerprinted, had his mugshot taken, and somewhere in the middle of it all, a former soldier, a father, a loyal husband, became a suspect. Meanwhile, Leah went crying to the neighbors, telling them Dylan had been emotionally and physically abusive. She posted cryptic Instagram stories. Sometimes freedom begins with courage, with hashtags like #break the cycle. That same day, Brian Quinn dropped a new podcast episode titled Narcissistic Ex-Husbands, and people flooded Leah's page with praise. Comments rolled in. "You're so brave. Stay strong, Mama. Protect your daughter." Men like that belong in jail. Dylan spent a night in lockup. By the time his bail hearing came around, Leah had already filed an emergency custody petition, claiming Dylan posed a direct threat to Maddie's emotional well-being. Her lawyer told the judge that Leah wouldn't need to show fresh bruises, because she had already submitted photos. But Dylan remembered clearly. Leah wasn't even home that day. When he got out, Dylan found an email from his job. "Pending investigation, your security clearance has been suspended." He was an IT consultant for a defense contractor. No clearance meant no paycheck. Within 24 hours, Dylan Hayes went from father and provider to unemployed, homeless, since the house was under Leah's name, and legally cut off from his own daughter. He reached out to an old friend and former colleague, Ellen Brooks, now a sharp, no-nonsense divorce attorney. Ellen listened calmly, then asked directly, "Do you have any proof this is fabricated?" Dylan mentioned the CCTV footage, recorded from a smoke detector cam he installed to monitor Leah's behavior. But Leah had already told the police it was illegal surveillance, making its admissibility in court questionable. Ellen said, "We need more than just footage. We need context, a pattern, a timeline, and most of all, witnesses." Dylan called his friend Eddie, a local grocery store manager. Eddie told him that on the same day Leah claimed Dylan assaulted her, she'd been at the store that morning, looking perfectly normal. No bruises, no fear. "We've got cameras, bro," Eddie said. "If you want the footage, I'll pull it." "Save it," Dylan said. "Make copies. Back up everything." For the next few days, Dylan lived out of motels. Every morning he showed up in court, stood before the judge, but every time Leah brought something new. A therapist's affidavit. A vague note from Maddie's school counselor claiming she'd become withdrawn. Ellen said, "They're building a story. You have to counter it with facts. Then Leah went after his pickup truck, claiming Dylan chased her in it during one of the alleged abuse incidents. Somehow, DMV records had gone missing. Leah already had ownership transfer papers ready. That's when Dylan realized this wasn't about cheating or custody. This was a calculated takedown. Brian Quinn was the director. Leah was the lead actress. And Dylan? He was the villain in a script he never even saw coming. One afternoon, outside the courthouse, Dylan got a text from Eddie. Got the footage, sending via WeTransfer. Leah walks in. No marks, no limp, she's smiling, buying wine. Ellen reviewed it and said, "This destroys her timeline." Good. But another blow was waiting. Leah had now blocked Dylan's visitation with Maddie. The new allegation. Dylan had manipulated Maddie during their time together, claimed he pressured her into calling Leah a liar. Dylan looked again at the drawing Leah submitted in court as evidence. A picture of a house. A man drawn like a shadowy monster. A mother with a glowing heart. But Dylan had a different drawing. One Maddie gave him during a motel visit Ellen had arranged. In it, Maddie drew herself and Dylan on a swing set. Above them, in a speech bubble, she wrote, "I miss Daddy." Ellen looked at it and said, "We're submitting both. Let the judge decide what's real and what's rehearsed." At this point, Dylan understood. The battle wasn't just with Leah. It was with a system that too often placed a woman's tears above a man's truth, without ever checking the facts. The next week's hearing would be critical. In her closing arguments, Ellen stood tall and clear. "Your Honor, this isn't just a custody case. It's character assassination, built on manipulated timelines, psychological grooming, and social media theater." The judge said, "We'll revisit custody in 10 days. In the meantime, Ms. Hayes is instructed not to relocate the child out of state. And Mr. Hayes, you are to submit all surveillance devices for forensic review." As they exited the courtroom, Leah looked at Dylan for the first time. Without guilt, without fear. She said softly, "This is just the beginning." Dylan didn't respond, but something inside him had shifted. Not rage, but resolve. He made a silent vow. He would dismantle every lie Leah had told, peel back every layer of Brian's false persona, and bring his daughter home. The little girl who once said, "Daddy, you're my hero." Over the next 3 weeks, Dylan spoke to Maddie just once, and the call was supervised. Her voice didn't have that sparkle it used to when she laughed at his silly jokes. She whispered, "Daddy, Mommy says Brian is my new dad." Dylan's throat tightened, but he stayed steady. "I'll always be your dad, Maddie. That'll never change." And in that moment, Dylan made a vow. He wasn't going to win this with just court filings. He was going to fight with truth, and he was going to sharpen that truth into a blade. Step 1. Expose Brian Quinn, the so-called transformational life coach who had infected his family like rot. Ellen suggested, "Start with the state licensing database. Let's see if this guy is even legit." He wasn't registered. That was the first crack in the armor. Dylan ran a reverse image search on the testimonials posted on Brian's website. Shockingly, 2 of the 3 photos were stock images. Fake clients. Fake reviews. Ellen muttered, "This guy's either a ghost or a con." Dylan started combing through old podcast transcripts, social media posts, anything Brian had ever published. In one post, Brian called himself a trauma healing specialist. In another, a spiritual boundary enforcer. The words sounded impressive, but there were no credentials, no board, no background. Dylan activated a burner phone with a new SIM card and booked a consultation under a fake name. Mark Tully, a Navy veteran with PTSD. Brian responded within 2 hours. A Zoom session was set. Dylan recorded the call. During the session, Brian said, I can help you rewrite your narrative. Trauma is just trapped power. You need release. You need disassociation from your abuser. Dylan responded softly, "What if my abuser is still around, legally entangled with me?" Brian replied, "Then you must eliminate the emotional contract. Emotionally kill what the law still recognizes." Legally inadmissible? Maybe, but morally, it was a confession. Ellen said, "We need someone who knew him before the rebranding." Dylan started digging into Brian Quinn's past and found a trail on a deep forum thread. A clue: Robert Quinlan, arrested in Colorado in 2012 for false therapeutic identity and unauthorized hypnosis on vulnerable clients. The case was sealed. But Dylan had a Navy contact, Julia Marks, now part of the FBI's behavioral profiling unit. He called her, knowing it was a risk. Julia hesitated. "I can't help you, not without cause." Dylan said just one thing. What if a man manipulating women into alienating their children is doing it across state lines? 3 days later, Julia called back. Robert Quinlan, multiple aliases, flagged in Utah, Nevada, Florida, sealed settlements with NDAs. He targeted single mothers through so-called healing circles. And there's more. Dylan felt a chill run down his spine. Julia continued, "He was flagged once by a missing child task force. Charges dropped due to lack of direct evidence. But one mother disappeared with her 5-year-old daughter. Still missing." Ellen listened and immediately said, "We're subpoenaing his coaching records, and we're filing a motion to ban him from being anywhere near Maddie." Dylan asked Eddie, the grocery store manager, to enhance the surveillance footage from the day Leah claimed bruises. The footage showed her casually shopping for wine and makeup, and then something unexpected. Zoomed in, Leah appeared to be holding a small case, a bruise kit, the kind used in stage makeup. Ellen said, This is our wedge. Combine this with Brian's fraudulent identity, and we've got a conspiracy taking shape." Around the same time, Dylan found a GPS tracker hidden under his pickup truck, one he never installed. Quinn had been tracking him. Not a court-worthy crime, but a clear sign. Leah and Brian wanted to stay 2 steps ahead. Then came the final jolt. Dylan received an anonymous email. No sender. Subject line: "She's next." Attached was a scanned pamphlet about child custody law, with Leah and Brian's names scribbled in pen. Ellen looked at it and said, "They're planning to move Maddie." Dylan's blood boiled. Without waiting, he walked into the courthouse himself and filed for an emergency injunction. On the day of the hearing, Brian showed up in court, confident, smug, wearing an expensive coat like armor. Ellen looked at him and said under her breath, "Time to peel him open." And she did. Ellen laid out Brian's multiple identities before the court: Robert Quinlan, sealed arrests, non-disclosure agreements, falsified credentials. Then she played the grocery store footage. Leah, without a bruise in sight, casually holding what appeared to be a theatrical bruise kit. The courtroom fell silent. For the first time, fear flickered in Leah's eyes. And slowly, the arrogance drained from Brian's face, replaced by something else: uncertainty. The judge ordered Brian to remain at least 100 feet away from anything custody-related. Leah was ordered to undergo a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. As they exited the courtroom, Brian stared down Dylan and muttered, "You think you've won?" Dylan replied, calm and steady, "I haven't even started." Because now Dylan didn't just have suspicion. He had surveillance footage, legal leverage, powerful allies, and something he hadn't had before: purpose. To protect Maddie, and to warn every mother unknowingly caught in a predator's trap masquerading as self-help. Dylan Hayes stood in the courthouse hallway beside his attorney, Ellen Brooks. His hands were in his pockets, but his fists were clenched. Today's hearing was different. Leah had submitted a new affidavit through her lawyer, claiming she was pregnant with Brian Quinn's child. When Ellen read those words, she lowered her head for just a moment, then whispered, "They're playing the emotional trauma card. Again." The judge entered. The courtroom rose. Proceedings began. Leah sat quietly at her table, her eyes rehearsed with a kind of fragile helplessness. Brian wasn't present. His restraining order kept him out, but it felt like his presence hovered over the room, a shadow cast from somewhere unseen. Leah's lawyer stood up and announced theatrically, "Your Honor, my client has recently discovered she is pregnant. The father is Brian Quinn. This has severely impacted her emotional stability. Any interaction with Mr. Hayes is now deeply traumatic." Ellen rose slowly from her seat. "Your Honor, this claim is not only unsubstantiated, it is fabricated." The judge asked, "Do you have evidence?" "We do," Ellen replied, "and we request to present it." She played a surveillance video from a local pharmacy. The footage showed Leah buying pregnancy test kits. The timestamp, 2 days after she filed her affidavit. Ellen looked to the judge. The claim states she already knew she was pregnant at the time of filing, but as you can see, she purchased the test afterward. That alone calls her entire testimony into question. She then played another clip. Same day, same pharmacy. Leah walking out of the restroom. No panic, no distress. Laughing on a phone call. Ellen continued, "And we've obtained confirmation from the pharmacy. No follow-up, no prescriptions, no OB/GYN appointments. Nothing to suggest she ever confirmed a pregnancy." Leah's face went pale. Her breathing grew heavy. Ellen didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word cut with surgical precision. False pregnancy claims in custody disputes are a manipulative tactic. But what's more disturbing, Your Honor, is how this woman uses her daughter as a pawn. She then called a new witness to the stand. Tessa Granger, 34, a massage therapist and former client of Brian Quinn. Tessa took the oath and said, "Brian offered me $3,000 to testify against my ex. Said it would help me win full custody. I told him no. He said I wasn't committed to my healing." The judge leaned forward. "Did you report this?" Tessa replied, "I was scared. He said he had lawyers who could make problems disappear." Ellen pointed toward Leah. "And that's exactly the kind of pressure Mr. Hayes has been enduring. This isn't just a custody battle, Your Honor. It's a manipulation ring, led by a man now under federal investigation." Then Dylan reached into his briefcase and unfolded a piece of paper. Maddie's crayon drawing. Ellen explained, "This was drawn during a school session. It shows Mr. Hayes in a cage. The child doesn't see him as mean or bad, just trapped." In the corner, she wrote, "I miss Daddy." The judge stared at the drawing for several seconds. The simple lines, the soft colors, the devastating truth told by a child too young to understand the games adults play. Leah now looked visibly shaken. Her eyes darted across the courtroom as if searching for a way out. But the truth had walled her in. There was nowhere to go. Ellen concluded, "Your Honor, the false pregnancy, the conflicting drawings, the incentivized testimony, these aren't just lies. They are tools of psychological abuse. And they are not being wielded by Mr. Hayes, but by those manipulating Ms. Hayes." The judge issued the ruling. Temporary full custody granted to Dylan Hayes. Leah would receive only supervised visitation, pending her psychiatric evaluation. Leah didn't collapse in the courtroom. She didn't cry. She just sat there, breath shallow, face drained, like someone had pulled the air out of her world. As Dylan stepped into the hallway, he spotted Maddie standing with her school counselor. Their eyes met, and she ran straight into his arms. He kissed the top of her head. "I'm here, Pumpkin. I'm not going anywhere." Maddie looked up and said, "Mommy said you were dangerous." Dylan smiled gently and asked, "And what do you think?" Maddie whispered. "I think Mommy doesn't know how to tell the truth." Ellen stood beside them, her eyes gleaming with victory, her expression calm. "The battle's not over," she said quietly. Dylan nodded. But she just ran out of weapons. Because for the first time, the court had questioned Leah's narrative. And Dylan had the truth. He had a child's unfiltered voice, and he had the resolve of a father willing to protect his daughter from any emotional predator. Brian Quinn's arrest was a victory for Dylan Hayes, but it wasn't the end. That morning, when Brian was taken into custody on charges of vehicle tampering, attempted insurance fraud, and felony endangerment, Dylan finally exhaled in court. Surveillance footage showed Brian planting a whiskey bottle in Dylan's truck, leaking brake fluid, and then anonymously tipping off authorities, trying to paint Dylan as an unfit, reckless father. When Leah heard of Brian's arrest in the courtroom hallway, she pulled out her phone and immediately began deleting messages. Ellen saw it, walked over, and said, "Deleting chats won't erase federal records." But Leah wasn't done playing the game. FBI agent Julia Marks contacted Dylan. "Brian's aliases go deeper than Robert Quinlan," she said. "We've uncovered at least 3 more identities, linked to multiple custody fraud cases, including some overseas." "Overseas?" Dylan asked. "Brazil," Julia replied. "There are signs they were preparing to flee the country. We intercepted a package. It contained fake passports, one for Leah, one for Maddie." Dylan felt his chest tighten. Ellen filed a motion declaring Leah a flight risk. Her passport was seized, but that night, the storm returned. Dylan got a call from Maddie's school. Leah had come to pick her up, claiming it was an emergency. But school records showed Dylan had full custody. Leah presented a forged ID. When staff refused, she rushed back to her car and sped away. Panic took over Dylan. Leah wasn't just defeated now, she was dangerous. "We need a federal injunction for attempted child abduction," Ellen said. The FBI raided Leah's apartment. Inside a hidden compartment, they found 3 things. 1. A flash drive containing surveillance photos of Maddie, at the park, at school, outside Dylan's motel, even outside a grocery store. 2. A forged birth certificate listing Brian as Maddie's biological father. 3. A torn diary page, handwritten by Leah. "He said we'd be gone by June. No more courts, no more Dylan, just us." Julia Marks told Dylan, "This is no longer just a family court issue. This is an interstate child trafficking conspiracy." Leah's arrest was imminent. But she vanished. The apartment was empty. Her car was gone. Her phone shut off. "She's either running toward the remnants of Brian's network," Ellen said, "or being shielded by it." Dylan activated the hidden surveillance system he'd quietly installed near Leah's home after the last custody hearing. The footage showed a woman, hooded, wearing sunglasses. Her face bore similarities to Leah's, but up close, there were cuts, bruises. Like she wasn't just hiding. She was transforming. Dylan handed the footage to Julia. "She's not alone," Julia said. "Someone's helping her." The FBI traced another name, Marcus Weller, registered manager of a healing retreat center under one of Brian's old aliases. Leah had recently wired money to that account, and that's when Dylan understood. Brian's network hadn't ended. Leah was no longer just a pawn. She had become the bishop. "I want Maddie out of the city," Dylan told Ellen. "We can file for emergency relocation," she replied. But Dylan had something else in mind. He took Maddie and left for the hills, off-grid, to a remote cabin owned by an old Navy friend. No phone signal, no internet, no visitors. "Are we hiding?" Maddie asked. Dylan shook his head. "We're protecting." The FBI was searching for Leah, but Dylan knew what was coming wouldn't be legal. It could be physical. He opened the flash drive again, found a hidden folder. Inside, one video, blurry, handheld. like it was filmed secretly through a window. Maddie was on the playground at school, no audio, but a whisper behind the camera. Soon, Dylan's eyes filled with fire. He messaged Ellen. She's not running anymore, she's hunting. Dylan abandoned legal maneuvers. He set up off-grid surveillance, activated trip sensors, created a defensive perimeter around the cabin. "You're setting traps?" Ellen asked. "I'm setting boundaries," Dylan replied, because the woman Leah had become was not the woman Dylan had once married. She was now a programmed weapon, manufactured by Brian's warped philosophy. And when humans become weapons, war is never fought alone. But Dylan wasn't alone. He had the truth, and he had his daughter, sleeping soundly now, her face free of fear. Dylan Hayes wasn't sitting in court today to testify. He was sitting there for hope. After 4 long months of legal war, the judge had finally granted permission for Maddie's school therapist and teacher to speak. 2 people closest to the emotional truth of this small, scarred child. Maddie wasn't present. Ellen had made sure of that, to shield her from any emotional triggers. But her voice, her presence, was about to echo in that courtroom. The first witness was Ms. Valerie Monroe, Maddie's 3rd-grade teacher. Valerie took the oath and said, "Maddie has always been a quiet child. But lately, she's been expressing herself through drawings. There was one where she drew her home. One figure was labeled the liar." Ellen asked, "And who did she say that figure was?" Valerie took a deep breath. "She told me it was her mom." Leah's eyes widened. Her composure shattered. Next came Dr. Lena Shore, Maddie's child psychologist. With a calm but unwavering voice, Lena said, "Maddie has displayed clear signs of narrative coercion, a pattern where a child is fed false memories or is psychologically prompted to adopt someone else's beliefs." Ellen asked, "What prompted that diagnosis?" Lena said, "She once told me that her new daddy said real daddies don't cry. And then she whispered, 'But mine did. And I liked it when he did, because it was real.'" Judge Merrick paused, long and heavy. Ellen stood. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to play a recorded statement made voluntarily by the child during a therapeutic session." The judge nodded. Permission granted. The screen lit up. In the video, Maddie sat on a soft couch beside her therapist. Her voice was quiet, but each word cut through the silence like a blade to the heart. "Sometimes Mommy tells me Daddy is dangerous, but Daddy never hit, only cried. Mommy said to tell people that he yells, but Daddy didn't yell, not even when she broke his guitar. Brian says Daddy's house is dirty, but Daddy cleaned it every time. I saw him. He cleaned with music on. I just want the yelling to stop, and the lies. I want the old mommy, not the scary one." At the end of the video, the therapist asked, "If you could say one thing to both your parents, what would it be?" Maddie replied, "Please stop fighting, but only if you're telling the truth. If not, let Daddy win." Leah sat still in the courtroom, like the air had been sucked from her lungs. Judge Merrick turned toward her. "Ms. Hayes, would you like to respond to any of this?" Leah looked up. Her eyes were dry, but not empty. They held something else, a cocktail of guilt and collapse. "Yes," she said, "I would." She took the stand. Her voice trembled, not out of strategy, but from fear, regret, and the undeniable weight of consequences. "Brian told me that bruises can be created, that if I made Dylan look dangerous, no one would ask questions." The courtroom held its breath. "He told me to control the narrative, and I did. I bought the bruise kit. I watched tutorials. I sent pictures I knew were fake. I lied in court. I coached Maddie to say things she didn't even understand." Ellen asked softly, "Why, Ms. Hayes?" Leah's voice cracked. "Because I thought if I could erase Dylan, I could erase my shame, my choices, my failure. She turned to the judge, then to Dylan. I'm sorry, not because I got caught, but because I ruined my daughter's trust, and I don't think I deserve to be called her mother anymore. Judge Merrick set down his pen. The courtroom was silent. Based on the testimonies, confessions, and psychiatric evaluations, he said, this court terminates the shared custody agreement. Full legal and physical custody is granted to Mr. Dylan Hayes. Leah closed her eyes. Ellen turned to Dylan. His expression wasn't victorious. It was quiet. The kind of peace that comes not from winning, but from surviving. As they stepped into the hallway, Dylan stood still, holding the same drawing Maddie once gave him. The one that read, "I miss Daddy." He knew now. It wasn't just about bringing her back. It was about teaching her how to believe again, to love again, and above all, proving that no matter how far someone falls, if truth is on their side, they can rise. Brian Quinn's real name was now public, Robert Quinlan, a name buried in 4 sealed FBI case files, hidden behind settlements, erased court records, and the silence of missing children. Julia Marks, the same FBI agent who had once told Dylan this wasn't a custody case but a psychological war, was now leading the federal investigation. Robert Quinlan has operated under 6 aliases in 12 states, she told Dylan. But it's deeper than identity fraud. He doesn't just manipulate, he scripts full narratives, custody fraud, false DV reports, and when all else fails, abduction. Dylan's blood ran cold. Julia handed him a flash drive, encrypted forensic data. One clip showed Leah, and behind her, an SUV. The same SUV spotted near Maddie's school the day Leah tried to take her without permission. Was Brian in that SUV? Dylan asked. Julia's face was tense. We believe he orchestrated it, but someone else was driving. He's using third-party operatives now, likely women who pose as concerned relatives. That's when Dylan knew. This wasn't about court orders anymore. This was identity erasure. Maddie now lived with Dylan in a remote cabin in the hills, off-grid, disconnected from the internet, phones, and any traceable signal. The cabin was fortified with tripwires, mirror surveillance, and every tool Dylan had learned from his Navy training. But one night, Maddie asked, "Daddy, who was that man who used to smile with Mommy?" Dylan paused. He was someone who wanted to take you away. Why? Because he thinks love can be forced, that if he scares people enough, they'll call it care. Maddie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm glad you scare him more." Dylan pulled her into his lap. But that night would be the last peaceful one. The next morning, one of the tripwires was broken. Dylan went on full alert. There were footprints, 2 sets, one male, one female. He rushed Maddie to the panic room, a hidden wooden chamber inside the cabin, stocked with emergency food, water, and a silent alarm trigger. Then he rewound the surveillance footage. 3:47 a.m. 2 shadowy figures. One tried the back door knob. The other flashed a light at the window. They backed off just before the alarm tripped. Dylan dialed Julia on a satellite phone. "We picked up chatter from an encrypted line out of New Mexico," she said. "They're referring to a child as the Golden Token. That's Maddie." Dylan asked, "Why the hell would they call her that?" Julia replied, "Because she's the centerpiece. She's the only one who can directly tie Robert Quinlan to psychological child coercion. If she testifies as a minor witness, this case becomes a federal human rights violation." That's when Dylan understood. Maddie wasn't just his daughter anymore. She was the keystone of a national case. Julia sent backup, a 2-person U.S. Marshals unit. But when they arrived at the cabin, Dylan and Maddie were gone. Because Dylan had already left, through the forest, activating emergency escape route B. He didn't trust anyone anymore. Around the same time, Ellen contacted Dylan, with a chilling update. Leah's psychiatric logs show she was in contact with someone through a secure burner phone, even after Brian's arrest. That number just pinged near El Paso, registered to Jessica Kane. Dylan's mind flashed back. Jessica, Brian's first wife, the one they said had vanished. Julia confirmed it. Jessica was alive and working for Brian. Robert used her for cross-border recovery operations, Julia said. It's a polished term for child smuggling. Now, it all made sense. Brian may have been behind bars, but his network was still in motion. Leah was never acting alone. Jessica Kane wasn't just another pawn. She was the queen. And her next move was clear. Maddie's abduction. Dylan wasn't in America anymore. He was in a war zone. He activated his final option, a bunker-style underground hideout he'd built years ago for survival. Now it would save his daughter's life. Maddie was safe, inside the bunker. Dylan told her, "This isn't forever, but it's for now. You're safe here." I promise. Maddie looked at him and asked, "Will you go fight them?" Dylan smiled. But it wasn't a father's smile, it was a soldier's. "Yes," he said, "but not with bullets, with truth." Dylan sent the FBI the fully decrypted flash drive, and inside they found an audio log. Brian's voice, "She's not a child. She's leverage. She's the key to break the narrative." That was enough. The FBI intercepted Jessica Kane at the border. She had a forged passport in Maddie's name and a parental consent form signed by Brian. The case was no longer personal. It had become federal. Jessica wasn't sitting in a courtroom. She was inside a secured federal facility, hands cuffed, but eyes calm. She didn't look like Leah or Brian. There was no arrogance, no fear, just exhaustion, and the weight of a truth begging to surface. Julia Marks called Dylan on a secure video line. "Meet Jessica," Julia said. "She has something to tell you, about your daughter, and about Brian's Plan Z." Dylan leaned in. Jessica took a deep breath and said, "I know how it started, and I know where it ends." What she was about to share wasn't just about Leah or Maddie or Dylan. It was bigger. Jessica explained she wasn't Brian's first wife. She was his first collaborator. "Brian started out as a healer," she said. "But what he really wanted was control, influence. He figured out early that single mothers in custody battles were easy targets. Emotional, scared, isolated. He'd insert himself as their savior, then isolate them from their partners, feed them fake domestic abuse narratives, and eventually offer them a way out." Dylan asked, "What do you mean?" Jessica's voice hardened. "Child relocation under fabricated threats. He called it emotional rescue, but it was child laundering. He'd create legal chaos, relocate the child overseas with forged consent, and then sell a new identity on the darknet. That was Plan Z." "Plan Z?" "Yes," she said. Z stood for zero trace. Once the child was protected under false legal cover, he'd sell them to isolated families abroad, always under humanitarian pretenses. Dylan felt the blood freeze in his veins. Jessica continued, "He's done it 3 times before. Once in Oregon, once in Nevada, and once in Ontario. All single mothers, all fathers framed. Only one child was ever found." Later, Ellen told Dylan, Jessica had given the FBI a detailed blueprint. A central server in Panama City, encrypted client lists, offshore funding routes, all under a shell company called Theragenics Initiative. In this entire operation, Maddie was the centerpiece, because Dylan had military clearance. If Brian could destroy Dylan's credibility, Maddie's disappearance would be so clean. Even the FBI wouldn't be able to track it. Leah's confession and Jessica's testimony exposed the full horror of the truth. Julia Marks told Dylan, "Brian didn't love Leah. He used her. And he didn't want Maddie. He wanted what Maddie represented: leverage. Jessica also revealed that Maddie wasn't just being tracked for custody. She was part of a behavioral study, Jessica said. Brian wanted to see how a child breaks. That's how he figured out which ones transition well once taken abroad. Ellen submitted Jessica's affidavit to the court. The judge immediately classified it under national security clearance, and Brian's sentencing proceeded under federal racketeering, human trafficking, and psychological endangerment charges. But there was another twist. The FBI discovered that Jessica hadn't left Brian 3 years ago. Her daughter Emily had been abducted by him. Jessica was cooperating now only because the Bureau had promised that if she exposed the entire Theragenics network, they'd help her find Emily. Dylan made one final visit to Leah. She was in a psychiatric facility now. She wasn't the Leah he remembered. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes vacant, her face hollowed by guilt and grief. Dylan asked, "You would have let him take her, wouldn't you?" After a long silence, Leah nodded. "I thought she'd be safer. Away from me. Away from my mistakes." Dylan's voice was cold. Mistakes can be fixed. Selling your child into darkness can't. Leah whispered only one thing. "Don't let her become like me." Dylan petitioned the court and successfully had Leah's parental rights legally terminated. Maddie was no longer just in his custody. She was under his complete protection. Jessica's disclosures led the FBI straight to Brian's main server. Dozens of names, child profiles, fake therapist reports, court manipulation templates. Everything. Brian was placed in solitary confinement. And the one thing that broke him? Jessica's testimony and Dylan's victory. The case wasn't fully closed, but the door through which someone could steal Dylan's daughter's life. It was now sealed. 5 years later, Cedar Grove, Oregon, a quiet, peaceful suburb. There's a new name on the mailbox now. Maddie Hayes, just Hayes. Dylan had Leah's name legally removed from Maddie's birth certificate, not as punishment, but as a symbolic cleansing. He knew Maddie didn't need to run from her past. She needed to grow through it. Maddie is now 13, an honor student, member of the poetry club, rising star in the local community theater. But most importantly, she's a child again. One day, in her English class, she was assigned to write a short story. "A time I felt safe." She wrote, "I felt safe when my dad said, 'I believe you,' even when no one else did. I felt safe when he took me to a house with no noise but warm blankets. I felt safe when he didn't cry, because I knew he already had." When Dylan read it, his eyes filled with tears. But they weren't tears of pain. They were the kind you earn. Dylan is now a government-registered family safety consultant. He runs webinars for military families and separated parents, teaching them how to recognize emotional coercion, maintain legal records, and use surveillance responsibly. In his sessions, people sit quietly, not because they're bored, but because when Dylan speaks, he speaks the language of someone who's lived it. Julia Marks now works out of the FBI's Washington, D.C. office. But every year, she sends Maddie a postcard. "Stay brave. You're why I do what I do." Jessica Kane helped dismantle the entire Panama-based server structure. And finally, after 7 years, her daughter Emily was located in the Dominican Republic. Jessica wrote to Dylan, "You gave me the courage I lost. Thank you. Leah remains in a psychiatric care home in Nevada." The letters she once tried to send to Dylan were returned unopened. She stopped writing over a year ago. Her final communication was a single handwritten note. "Tell her I'm sorry. But don't make her remember me through your eyes. Let her decide." Dylan kept that note, not for Maddie, for himself. To remember that healing isn't linear, and forgiveness isn't a right. It's a gift. One only the hurt have the power to give or withhold. One morning, Maddie asked him, Why do you still do those webinars, Dad? You already saved me. Dylan smiled. Because somewhere out there, he said, someone else is still scared, and maybe their dad doesn't know how to fight back yet. Maddie held his hand, the same hand that once cut the chains from her life. Then teach them, she said, just like you taught me. Dylan looked outside. In the backyard stood a small flagpole. The American flag waved gently. Beneath it, a wooden sign read, "This home was fought for." And Dylan knew. He hadn't just saved a child. He had saved the truth. And when truth survives, the stars always find their way back into the sky. The end.